The girl who talked to shadows at dawn. There are stories that slip through the cracks of history, tales whispered only when night is about to break and the first pale light of dawn crawls across the horizon. These are not the stories you find in old books, nor the ones your grandmother would dare to share before bedtime. They live in the silence between shadows, in the moments when reality bends and the impossible dares to reveal itself. And tonight, I will tell you one of them. A story about a girl who spoke to shadows at dawn. Her name was Elara, a quiet child who lived on the edge of a forgotten village. Nobody could quite remember when her family had moved there. Some villagers said they arrived during a storm. Others insisted they had always been there, though none could recall seeing them before. Elara herself was unlike the other children. While they ran through the fields laughing, she spent her mornings in silence, staring at the shapes the early light cast on walls and trees. It was as if she were listening, not to birdsong or the wind, but to something else entirely, something hidden, something the others could not hear. From a young age, people noticed strange things around her. The shadows in her room never seemed to obey the light. They stretched longer than they should, bent in directions they had no reason to bend, and sometimes they moved when no one else did. Neighbors whispered that she carried a curse. Her mother dismissed it as nonsense, but even she seemed unsettled when the sun was rising. For those were the moments Elara would retreat to the edges of the forest, standing still as if awaiting a signal. At first, villagers thought she was simply a peculiar child with too much imagination. But as the years passed, the stories grew darker. Farmers swore they saw silhouettes lingering near her house when no one else was around. One hunter even claimed he saw Elara speaking to something at dawn, a tall, thin figure without a face, whose outline dissolved into the fog. When asked what it was, he refused to speak again, trembling as if the memory itself clawed at his mind. But the truth, as it always does, ran deeper than fear and superstition. Elara was not cursed. She was chosen. You see, dawn is not simply the beginning of a new day. It is a threshold, a fragile crack between night and light, a liminal space where two realities overlap. Shadows at this hour do not belong entirely to darkness nor to brightness. They are alive, wandering between worlds, seeking voices to listen to. Most of us never notice them because we do not dare to look. But Elara, she listened. She dared. And in return, the shadows spoke back. They told her secrets no one else could know. Names of those long buried, tragedies not yet written, and whispers of places where the veil was thinnest. At first, these conversations were innocent. Small fragments of forgotten stories, ancient lullabies hummed in tones colder than frost. But as Elara grew older, the shadows grew hungrier. They asked her questions. They sought bargains. They longed for her to follow them beyond the boundary of dawn. And though she resisted, curiosity always pressed against her heart. Because Elara knew something no one else did. The shadows were not just reflections of people and objects. They were remnants. They were the echoes of all that had ever been lost. Elara's encounters with the shadows became a ritual. Every morning, while the villagers still slept, she would walk barefoot to the stone well at the edge of the forest. Its walls were cracked, moss creeping over its rim, and the water inside was so dark it swallowed even the faintest glimmer of light. No one used it anymore, claiming it had run dry. But Elara knew better. That well was not empty. It was a mirror for another world. She would sit by its side as dawn painted the sky in fading blues and bleeding oranges. The shadows would arrive slowly, like smoke drifting from invisible fires. Some were small and fragile, like broken pieces of forgotten dreams. Others were tall, towering silhouettes that bent unnaturally, their forms shifting in and out of focus. They would gather around her, and in hushed, fractured voices, they would speak. At first, they asked her to listen. They shared fragments of history older than the village itself. They spoke of kings whose names had been erased from memory, of rituals long abandoned, of the endless hunger that lingered in forgotten lands. Elara listened, fascinated even when their words dripped with dread. But soon, their tone changed. The shadows began to ask her for things. Small offerings at first, a lock of her hair, a single drop of blood on the edge of dawn, a toy she had carried since childhood, which vanished the moment she placed it by the well. In return, they gave her visions, flashes of the future, warnings of danger, glimpses of what was to come. One morning, they showed her the image of a fire sweeping through the village. She saw it so clearly, the sparks catching in dry hay, the terrified screams, the children running barefoot into the night. That evening, when a lantern tipped in the barn of a careless farmer, Elara was already there screaming for them to put it out before the flames could spread. The fire was contained and the villagers praised her intuition. But she knew it had not been intuition. It had been the shadows. This gift, however, came at a cost. Each time she spoke to them, Elara felt weaker, as though a piece of her was being drawn into the darkness. Her skin grew paler, her eyes darker. Her reflection in the mirror often seemed delayed, moving a heartbeat slower than her real body. And yet she returned every dawn, because with every secret they shared, she felt closer to unlocking the truth of who she really was. The shadows began calling her the bridge. They whispered that she was born to connect the living and the forgotten, to guide the wandering remnants into the light of awareness. But Elara started to suspect that guiding them was not their true intention. No, the shadows did not want passage into the light. They wanted her to follow them into the abyss. And the more she resisted, the more they tried to lure her. They began to speak of her family, telling her things no one else should know. They described the night she was born, the storm that rattled the walls, the moment her first cry echoed under a blood-red sky. They whispered that her life was not an accident, that her parents had been chosen too, though they never listened. "Elara," they hissed, their voices layered and trembling, "you belong to us. The dawn is yours, but the shadows are your true home." Elara tried to ignore the voices, but silence had become impossible. Even when she stayed indoors, the shadows would creep under the doorframe, stretching like fingers toward her feet. They never appeared under the noon sun, nor during the thick veil of midnight. No, they were bound to that fragile hour when darkness and light intertwined, when the world was most vulnerable. Her mother noticed the change in her daughter. Elara's hands trembled more often now, and her eyes seemed to drift into spaces unseen by others. At dinner, she would stop mid-bite, staring into the corners of the room as though someone were whispering her name. "Elara," her mother begged, "please stop wandering at dawn. You're fading away." But Elara could not stop. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a calling. One morning, when the sky was painted in the faintest streaks of silver, the shadows revealed something different. Instead of the usual fragments of history or whispers of danger, they showed her a doorway, a massive arch made of stone, half buried in the roots of an ancient tree deep within the forest. "Here," they murmured, their voices overlapping like a chorus of wind. "Here lies the threshold. Here, you will understand who you are." Elara's breath quickened. She had walked the forest countless times, yet she had never seen such a place. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The place where night was first born," they replied. That day she could not rest. The image of the stone arch gnawed at her thoughts. By nightfall she made her decision. While the village slept, she wrapped herself in a cloak and stepped quietly into the forest. Every branch seemed to bend toward her. Every gust of wind seemed to whisper warnings. But she pressed forward. Hours passed before she reached a clearing she had never noticed before. And there it was, the archway, exactly as the shadows had shown her. Massive, ancient, and covered in vines, it seemed to hum with an energy that vibrated through her bones. She approached it cautiously. The air was colder here, the ground damp as though touched by eternal twilight. As she reached out to touch the stone, her fingertips recoiled. The surface was warm, pulsing, almost alive. She pulled her hand back, heart pounding. The shadows gathered around her then, spilling from the trees, stretching across the ground like ink. "You are the bridge," they whispered. "Step through." Elara shook her head. Fear coiled inside her chest. What if she never returned? What if stepping through meant losing herself forever? But the shadows pressed closer. Their voices grew harsher, sharper. "You were born for this. Without you, the threshold will close forever. Without you, we will be trapped. And so will your truth." Her knees weakened. She wanted answers, but every instinct screamed that this path was dangerous beyond measure. She turned and fled, leaving the arch behind. The forest seemed to sigh in disappointment, and the shadows' whispers chased her all the way back to the village. From that night on, her dreams grew violent. She saw endless corridors of black glass, rivers of ink flowing beneath blood-red skies, and faces of people she had never met, yet felt she had known all her life. She would wake, gasping, her hands shaking, the faint echo of whispers still lingering in her ears. Elara began to wonder, had she made a mistake by refusing the threshold, or had she narrowly escaped something far worse than death? The days that followed only deepened her torment. The shadows, once content to whisper, had become relentless. They no longer waited for dawn. They appeared in the corners of her vision, even under the dim light of candles. They twisted the shapes of everyday objects, turning them into distorted silhouettes that moved when she blinked. And then came the voices of the lost. One morning, as Elara approached the well, she didn't hear the familiar chorus of shadows. Instead, she heard her father's voice, low, trembling, calling her name. But her father was alive, asleep inside their small home. The voice by the well was different. It carried sorrow, regret, and a hollow emptiness that chilled her to her core. "Elara," it said, "why do you resist us? We only wish to show you the truth." Tears stung her eyes. "You're not my father," she whispered, clutching the edge of the stone. "No," the voice admitted, "but I wear his memory. We wear the fragments of all who came before. We are not lies, child, we are echoes. And echoes cannot survive without a voice to answer them." Elara staggered back. For the first time, she realized what the shadows truly were. Not demons, not spirits, but remnants. Pieces of the past clawing desperately for recognition, feeding on the living to keep their form. And she was their anchor. The weight of this truth nearly crushed her. To be the bridge meant she could never truly belong to the living or the dead. She was trapped between worlds, carrying voices that were not hers, memories she had never lived. As dawn bled across the horizon, the shadows surged closer. Their whispers grew feverish. "Step through the arch, Elara. Step through and the burden will end. You will not carry us, you will become us. And in you, we will live forever." Her heart thundered. The thought of release tempted her more than she wished to admit. To no longer feel torn, to no longer hear voices clawing at her soul. It was almost too beautiful to refuse. Yet in that beauty, she sensed a trap. If she stepped through, she would no longer be Elara. She would vanish, swallowed by the weight of countless shadows. Still, the thought haunted her. Each dawn, she grew weaker. Each dawn, the whispers grew louder. And each dawn, the stone arch pulsed in her memory like a wound that would not heal. One evening, her mother found her sitting by the window, eyes hollow, her lips moving silently as though in prayer. "What are you saying, child?" her mother asked. Elara turned slowly, her voice cracked, distant. "I'm not speaking, Mother, I'm listening." Her mother wept, realizing she was losing her daughter to something she could not fight. That night, Elara made her choice. She would return to the arch. Not to surrender, but to face whatever truth waited beyond it. For if she did not, she feared she would waste away until nothing of her remained. The forest was silent the night Elara returned to the arch. The moon hung low, draped in a haze of silver mist, and every sound seemed muffled, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Her hands trembled as she carried a lantern, its flame flickering against the encroaching darkness. The path twisted unnaturally, as if guiding her toward the place she dreaded most. When she reached the clearing, the arch loomed larger than before. Its stones pulsed faintly, veins of dim light running through their cracks like blood in a living body. The air here felt thick, pressing against her lungs. Shadows stretched toward her feet, coiling like serpents, hissing her name. Elara, Bridge of Dawn, stepped through. Her lantern sputtered, the flame nearly dying. She gripped it tightly, trying to steady her breath. "What lies beyond?" she demanded, her voice echoing in the silence. A chorus answered her, thousands of voices layered atop one another. "All that was lost, all that seeks to return. Step through, and you will see the world beneath this one, the river of echoes, the city of endless night, the faces of every soul forgotten." Her chest tightened. Part of her longed to know, to see what no human eyes had ever seen. But another part of her recoiled in terror. If she entered, would she ever come back? Or would she dissolve into the chorus, her own identity stripped away? The ground trembled. The archway's center darkened, swirling like a mirror of ink. The portal had awakened. Elara's pulse raced as the shadows gathered in a frenzy, clawing toward the threshold, desperate to drag her with them. Suddenly, she remembered her mother's trembling hands, her voice filled with sorrow, begging her to stay. And then she heard another voice, not of the shadows, but of herself. A whisper deep inside her chest, fragile but resolute. "You are not their bridge. You are your own." With a cry, Elara thrust the lantern forward. The fragile flame flared, brighter than she had ever seen. Light surged across the clearing, slicing through the shadows like a blade. They screamed, their voices shrill and furious, retreating into the trees. The portal writhed, the ink swirling violently before collapsing inward, leaving only the ancient stone arch, silent, lifeless, empty. Elara fell to her knees, gasping. The weight that had clung to her for years seemed to lift, though faint whispers still lingered at the edge of her hearing. She had not destroyed the shadows, nor silenced them forever. But she had proven one thing. She was not their servant. She was not their chosen vessel. The dawn broke slowly, painting the sky with pale light. For the first time in years, Elara felt warmth touch her skin without fear. Yet deep down, she knew the battle was not over. The shadows would return. They always returned. But now she carried something stronger than their whispers, her own voice. Weeks passed, and the village began to notice the change in Elara. She no longer wandered to the well at dawn, nor sat for hours staring into the corners of rooms. Her laughter returned, quiet, delicate, but real. The villagers whispered less about curses and more about resilience. Some even claimed she had banished a darkness that had haunted their land for centuries. But Elara knew the truth. The shadows had not vanished. They still lingered at the edge of her vision when the sun first rose, watching, waiting. Yet they no longer had power over her. She had faced them and chosen herself over their endless hunger. And that choice gave her strength. One morning, as she stood at her window, the first rays of dawn spilling across her face, she saw the faint outline of a figure in the mist. A tall shadow, faceless, just as the hunter had once described. For a moment, fear clawed at her chest. But instead of running, she whispered firmly, "You cannot claim me. I am not your bridge. I am my own." The figure lingered, then faded with the light. Elara smiled faintly. She knew her journey was not one of endings, but of beginnings. The world would always carry shadows, and there would always be those who listened. But she had learned the most important truth of all. Shadows are not meant to define us. They test us, tempt us, remind us of what we could lose. But only we can decide whether to let them in. And so the story of the girl who spoke to shadows at dawn became more than a whisper. It became a warning and a promise. A warning that the boundary between worlds is fragile, and a promise that no matter how dark the whispers become, light will always belong to those who choose it. Conclusion. The tale of Elara reminds us of something deeply human. Every one of us carries shadows, doubts, Regrets, echoes of mistakes long past. They whisper at the edges of our minds, tempting us to surrender. But just like Elara, we are not defined by those whispers. We are defined by the choices we make in the face of them. True strength comes not from silence nor from surrender, but from the courage to speak our own voice above the noise. If you've ever felt haunted by your own shadows, remember, you are not their bridge. You are your own. Thank you for watching this video. We ask that you subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, activate the notification bell to be alerted about our posts. See you in the next video.